Welcome, IT changemakers, to the DEX Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
Hello, changemakers. You know what it is. It's the DEX show within a show within a show, which is, as you well know by now, those episodes of Reality Bytes where a selection of the Reality Bytes panel and myself get to interview fascinating Nexthinkers, fellow colleagues who are making a difference in our industry. And today, we have a very special guest, and it's a very special occasion because we are marking the recent release of Nexthink VDI Experience. And who better to talk about it than our friend and former guest on the show, Andy Philp. How are you doing, Andy?
Very good, thank you. Yeah, thank you for letting me join. Yeah, it was raining earlier today here in sunny England. I don't know what it's like for you, but yes, exciting day.
It's glorious out of this window, Andy, believe it or not. Yeah, a beautiful January day in London. You know, I came up with a really good question to kick things off, and I'm genuinely curious to know, before we get into VDI Experience and your role in it and all of that good stuff, I want to know, Andy, looking back on your career journey, what was the wildest or most unexpected job you had before joining product marketing at Nexthink?
That's a good question. Lots of jobs over the year. Well, I've been in IT for like 20 years, over 20 years, aging myself. But my first thought is actually going back before my IT journey. So back in my late teenage years, I used to work at a zoo, a kind of a theme park.
Nice.
And I was the train driver. So I would take I would take families and their kids so they could wave at the animals. And it was a great job because everyone else was, picking up litter and working in the restaurant. And so I got a really good deal on that one. But so that was kind of the most unexpected. And I think wildest or most challenging, if I think back in my IT career, back in the early and mid 2000s, I was in a consulting role for quite a big vendor back then. And a lot of the work around them was around migration, operating system migrations. So being responsible for the design and architecture of a fully automated XP migration project for, close to 30,000 devices in about 100 countries, fully automated. So back in those days, you could reboot the PC. Remember this, Tim? Hold Control Alt down, Pixie boot, and it would rebuild the PC.
Yeah, Pixie boot.
Architecting that or doing it automatically for, thousands of people. The classic thing with that was like an 18-month project. And
yeah.
The reason it comes to mind is when we finished that aspect and they'd started like rolling it out, they'd already started planning for the next migration.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, if we're going to talk about VDI, that kind of, that's just not really relevant anymore. That kind of treadmill of operating system migration is much easier in a VDI world to manage that. But that was probably the most challenging in my early career, at least, before moving on to other things.
So, Andy, you and I have something in common then. In my late teens, early 20s, I drove a school bus, which was very much like working at the zoo.
Right.
I mean, like that character on The Simpsons, the cool rocker guy with the long...
He was, definitely. But what brought you specifically to your role at Nexthink, Andy?
So if I think I've been in end-use computing now since the early 2000s. And if I think about it, like over the years, there's been all these terms, and I know, Tim, you'll probably nod, there's like systems resource management, PC lifecycle management, patch management, asset management, unified endpoint management, enterprise mobility management, right? These are all different names for effectively the same thing. And these are always focused inwards on IT. And what attracted me to Nexthink and also to DEX in particular was that basic premise of reframing everything around the employee, right? Rather than thinking about the IT inwards, and that being very transformative from a technology perspective in terms of what Nexthink can offer, but also in terms of the way IT can deliver back to their business as well. So it was an adjacency to EUC, very attractive, and it was the future. And as it turns out, it has been. So it's been a wild 4 years, Yeah.
And we're of course announcing on the podcast today. We're announcing it's been out for a few days, but VDI Experience. So maybe in a nutshell, tell us what it is, why it matters, and what your role is in relation to its development and launch.
Yeah, so VDI Experience is the latest product in our family, and it's built specifically to address the needs of VDI teams. And we'll probably dig into this in the conversation, but when we think of just getting down to the most basic elements, when an employee has any kind of issue when they're using VDI, regardless of what the source is, and we can get into details later, but the client, the network, the infrastructure, the VDI solution, whatever it is, it manifests itself as a VDI problem. And it's the VDI teams that are blamed and expected to fix it. The employees don't really have a sense of what's going on. Their desktop is somewhere else. The rest of IT don't necessarily understand the VDI solution. So really what happens is those teams are ending up, with the expectation to fix all of these problems. And we know that a lot of the time the problem has sometimes nothing to do with the VDI, but sometimes slightly linked to VDI. So we're really seeing that key pain of VDI teams, which I'm sure we'll talk about, addressing that with this product and sort of really focusing very deeply on it. So I'm part of the product marketing team here at Nexthink. So for me and my team, our job is to work with the rest of the organization. So product management, people that design and sort of build products, with engineering, marketing, sales, to really drive that vision and message around what our offerings do and how they help customers, and then working with customers and partners to really spread the message. So blessed to work in such a great team and for such a great company. So it's, as I said, it's been a fantastic 4 years so far, or nearly 4 years.
And Andy, I lived much of that blame game. It's VDI, it's Citrix, and I think it's an indication of how complicated those environments are, right? There's server technology, there's storage array technology, there's a network involved, corporate and last mile, there's application latency, there's all of the things that come with the end user compute on top of the VDI complexity. And it's all looked at as one black box that the VDI team has to fix. So that the back-end complexity and the cost that goes along with it is not trivial, right? And when you joined Nexthink almost 4 years ago, we were still getting the Infinity platform up and running. We were working on other plugins like Application Experience, and eventually with Flow and Amplify, and weren't really focused on VDI other than what we could kind of natively capture from the session. It was still kind of a novel idea. Did you feel when you joined a little bit like that voice in the wilderness? How were you feeling trying to get people to pay attention?
In some respects, I think you're right. I think you've summarized it in a good way. The reality is, VDI is a black art. And you said we've supported it for many years, but the reality is it isn't quite just like having another desktop. In some cases, it can be.
Mm-hmm.
And the real challenge with VDI is, when you scratch the surface just a little bit, it can get complicated very, very quickly. And that can be off-putting to a lot of people and frustrating. So when, someone asks a basic question like, how do I update an application? And the answer is normally, well, it depends. There's no one size fits all approach to VDI. And that can be kind of off-putting and sort of frustrating for a lot of people who aren't deeply familiar with the technology. Obviously, I've come from that background, which kind of helped. So yeah, I think maybe a voice in the wilderness is an interesting terminology, but I think it is a complicated topic if you let it get complicated.
So while we were kind of, I'll call it ramping up the focus on VDI, coming out with this product, others in the market, the VDI vendors, kind of got their attention on DEX, primarily because of the progress that we've made. So maybe a bit of a softball for you, or not a softball, a curveball maybe. Why do you think it's easier or better to handle VDI in a DEX platform holistically than the other way around, than for a VDI vendor to try to tackle all of the complexities of the end user compute in the physical world?
Yeah. Well, I think DEX is its own, that's an interesting question. Yeah. So DEX is its own kind of category and approach. It's very different to traditional kind of IT approaches. And that's where we live and we've breathed, and I would say we've created that category and really driven the market in that direction. And the way that, as you said, we've built the Infinity platform means that we can bring all, not just monitoring VDI, but all of those capabilities to bear in that world. It's a lot harder to go the other way, especially, the different disciplines. So I think we've been very deliberate in certainly our product strategy and our go-to-market strategy to say, let's build this first, I would argue, world's first purpose-built cloud-native platform for DEX as that underlying foundation, and then bring VDI on top of that. I think that's a much more sensible approach than trying to add add a DEX score to a monitoring product. It isn't necessarily the same thing. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of the work that goes into DEX is the correlation work. A lot of the intellectual property and value is built and baked into the platform. And that takes years and years of probably decades, really, of engineering and understanding and expertise. So that's where I think we're uniquely placed in the market to really make a big difference. And I'm sure we'll talk about some examples later.
Yeah, and as a similar to you, a former enterprise IT technologist, we looked at and used lots of analytics tools in that VDI environment because it was so complicated, right? And those tools tend to be very technically focused, not employee focused. So I look at the DEX platform, like you said, bringing in all of the other pieces of the puzzle into, in addition to the technical metrics, but also how the platforms are architected. We're architected for an environment that's not all in the same room, right? VDI tools are very much focused on devices that are all in the data center. So I think we got better flexibility there. What was the kind of as you've been here and gone through the evolution coming up to the release now? Do you have a point in that Nexthink journey where you felt it was the turning point where somebody was really starting to say, yeah, we get it? Was it a conversation with Sam or something that Pedro might have said? What was your kind of turning point to say this is going to happen?
I think there's been a lot of I would say increasingly seeing there's increased interest and adoption. I use the term VDI broadly, but especially in cloud, seeing more and more customers trying it, especially with cloud. Looking at is this right, and coming to Nexthink and asking us, for help, and also I'd say customers. Hearing, despite all the tools they're having, the pressure that these teams are under. And some of these are very large organizations, very mature VDI systems, and they're using, as you said, Tim, a combination of kind of vendor tools here, homegrown tools, open source, and they're trying to piece it all together, and it's not working very well. So I think there's just been this kind of continued interest and focus and request from our customers to really bring the world of DEX, as you said, to the VDI space end to end. And that's really what we're building with the VDI products. So lots of customer feedback. I'm thinking of, when I think about what we're doing, a lot of customers saying, look, just give us the information. We need to prove it's not VDI.
Right. It's like the network team, right? They troubleshoot to prove it's not their fault.
Right. And maybe we'll explore that later as well. But it's not just about, that term mean time to innocence or passing blame around. You need that end-to-end visibility in order not just to work out where the problem is, but who to work with and who to fix it. So I think that's going to be a big part of what we're doing here with the product. I'm very excited about that.
Many of the crisis calls that I was on at 2 a.m. about an offshore app developer team who couldn't work because of a VDI problem. It's not the VDI team on that call. It's every single discipline because nobody knows where the problem is.
Yeah.
And those are always fun calls. So we've got a fairly diverse audience, right? We've got technologists, we've got thought leaders, we have leadership. For those who maybe aren't as technically minded or don't work in a VDI environment, they're saying kind of, who cares, right? Why does this, in layman's terms, maybe explain to the audience why this matters so much?
Well, as I said before, and I'll say again, the purpose of the product VDI Experience is to focus on those VDI teams, right? I've said that, but it's tempting to dismiss VDI as just some server or piece of infrastructure over there. It doesn't really matter, and it's kind of almost a lift and shift approach that we hear sometimes. Oh, it's just physical, but it's in the cloud or it's in a data center somewhere. When we think about VDI, there's typically a strategic reason to do it. Now, there's clear benefits like to do with security and flexibility. Those are obvious. They tend to be around specific use cases for specific people. And if the idea is to make life easier for IT, which is, I would argue, the main purpose of VDI, it's not built for end users, it's built for IT, and to make it more cost effective. But if in the end it ends up, especially operationally, costing more, frustrating users and giving a nightmare to IT, that's the kind of trifecta of kind of pain that you're introducing into your environment. So I use the term, is the juice worth the squeeze? So from a business perspective, you have to think about, is this the right way? Is this going to allow people to work? But as you said, if you're an application owner, and people are accessing your application from VDI, you need to be interested. And something I think I would add to that, and you talk about this a lot, Tim, which is a strategic approach to DEX. We talk about reactive to proactive, preventative. A strategic approach has to encompass everyone, has to encompass all models of compute. So it's very important from a DEX perspective strategically, but the foundation for that is to get the information in to service those teams that are dealing with VDI day to day, so we can unlock those other objectives as well. So I think it's super important and becoming more and more relevant now, especially as we're seeing more and more organizations adopt VDI and desktop as a service technologies. So yeah,
I think it's important to highlight that comment that you made. VDI was developed and deployed to solve an IT problem, not because employees were screaming for VDI, right? We had a senior executive that said, we have a VDI environment. We are now going to replace every single desktop in the entire company with VDI. And that was not because the employees wanted VDI sessions. It was because he wanted to simplify his deployment of technology, when in the end, it was more expensive, it was more complicated, and it wasn't what the employees needed. So it never got legs. But I think that's important to know, that VDI is really a technology solution and not an employee demand.
Agreed. And I would say back in previous roles where I worked at, one of the main VDI vendors, one of the key reasons that VDI projects failed was user acceptance. You do all this work and then you get an experience that's not as good, or what, it's worse than what they had on a physical. What's in it for me other than you're just adding pain and complexity to my day job? I just want to be able to work. So I think, you're right. That's why I say it all the time, forgetting about the end target and just saying, what's a simpler way than managing a fleet of laptops? Let's go to a virtual world.
Right.
That could be good for IT, but in the long run, it may not be the best thing if it's not the right people and for the right use cases, which VDI is a fantastic solution for, but it certainly isn't for everyone. And I don't think for anyone, for you, Tim, it would be a terrible solution as your daily driver based on the amount of traveling you're doing.
Yeah, I would not survive. When I was at Hartford, I actually switched over to a published desktop for a couple of years, but I didn't do it because I wanted that experience. I didn't do it because out of a benefit for me. I did it because in a support role, I wanted to see what my customers were experiencing and using. I wanted to be part of their environment so
Really
I could live it. But it was not ideal, especially when you're mobile. Remote, like a remote worker working offshore in another time zone, when your database and your applications are over here, it makes some sense to get rid of latency, but certainly not for ease of use.
Yeah, and just to pick up on that, we've done certain events. We kind of asked the crowd questions. So when I was presenting with our product manager Dennis, we actually asked that to a room full of people that support VDI systems or have VDI in their environments, and we said, how many of you use a VDI desktop as your daily driver, right? As your daily desktop? And maybe 5% put their hands up. So I know it's a bit of a weird thing to say, but there's sometimes a lack of empathy as well when it comes to the IT people and what they're actually giving to the end person. So you doing that is a really good example of what, you can have firsthand experience of what the end customer is seeing.
The prevailing thought was, you think this is bad. This is solving a problem that you wouldn't even be able to live with, right? This is, compared to the alternative, this is awesome. So stop your complaining.
Hey, Andy, this is Sean. I had a question for you. You've probably touched upon this already a couple times, but just specifically, what would you say this launch means for VDI teams, like how it will change their work lives?
Yeah, I think I think that would be really what we're trying to really do with this product, is help those teams fix issues faster and reduce those escalations that they're getting. So we hear all the same time, whenever we talk to customers, that those VDI teams are inundated. In fact, we did the death and rebirth of a service desk report at the end of last year. And we found the same in our own research. It was that 9 out of 10 of the organizations are regularly escalating tickets to level 3 VDI teams. And here's the more important one. Nearly a third of them are doing it on at least a daily basis. So at least a daily basis, these highly specialized, more expensive specialist teams are dealing with day-to-day tickets around VDI. And it's a huge burden on them. So we think we can really go a long way to relieving that burden, fixing the issues when they're arising, reducing those escalations, and actually avoiding them altogether. Right? So putting them into the driving seat, and as we do with everything, moving from that reactive to a proactive model, so that they can fix it if it's in their domain, or fix it with the right team, with the right insights to avoid it altogether. So I think there's going to be a big unburdening we see of quite often a lot of hell that we see when we talk to those VDI teams that they're having to deal with on a daily basis. So yeah, I'm very excited about that.
Excellent. And I guess like to touch upon the proactivity that this solution offers to VDI teams, how does that proactivity compare to the proactivity that we offer via just the standard Nexthink solutions? Like, is there any difference, or
Yeah.
are they similar?
So I kind of mentioned this before. We built all our products on the Infinity platform. So I think the big difference, I'll kind of maybe talk about 3 areas. But in general, for VDI, one of the things we're doing with VDI Experience is we're really ramping up the granularity of our data and the fidelity of what we're capturing. The reason is those systems tend to be resourced at the sort of upper limit. You don't want a VDI desktop or a bunch of them running at like 10% utilization. You're sort of throwing money away. It means they're more susceptible and sensitive to changes. So we need to be much more expedient, much more granular with our data. So that's something we're doing. And then it sits on top of those other systems that are baked and built into Infinity. So for example, alerting. This is going to be a key thing for proactivity. We can find issues as they're emerging very, very quickly, inform the right teams, especially the VDI teams, and say, hey, there is an issue that's affecting a population of people that are in VDI, and here's the source before people start complaining. So that's going to be a big part of proactivity. I think another one is AI. We have a lot of AI in the product already and coming in the roadmap and what we're delivering with VDI Experience. So providing insights on the impact and scope. So we do that with alerting, but then diving into all of that VDI session data, finding the patterns and the signals and the noise and benchmarking across customers. I think it's going to really help simplify and really help get to the root of problems much, much quicker. On top of the fact we have this beautiful tool. You know, when you look at VDI Experience, it's incredible, beautiful visualizations, but the power to kind of look underneath the hood and find patterns that you wouldn't ordinarily find is going to be really key to being proactive and avoiding problems altogether. And I think automation, that's the last one. Being able to say, okay, sometimes there are recurring issues that happen all the time. Let's just use technologies like workflows within the Infinity platform to fix problems and fix them for good when they happen again, so we can avoid them altogether. So yeah, there would be the 3 ways that we're building on top of the Infinity platform. We're just cranking up the granularity and the fidelity for VDI systems, which is what's needed.
Final question for you then, Andy, before we let you go. What's the one thing you'd want every VDI team listening to know about this new product?
VDI Experience is built for you.
Thank you so much, Andy. Fascinating insights there. Great to talk to you. Thanks so much for plugging our Death and Rebuffer for Service Desk report as well. Listeners can find that excellent report in the show notes and they can download it free of charge. We will also link, of course, to some more information about VDI Experience. And I guess a final question for you, Andy, if they're a customer, if they're not a customer, if they're listening, if they want a demo, if they want some more information, where would you direct them? Where would you have us direct them in those show notes?
Well, we have our product page. We have an announcement blog, which will be out by the time this goes. Go there, find more information. We have showcase videos, a demo video. We have lots of other resources, and come talk to Nexthink and to learn more.
Quite so. You will find all of those resources below, listeners. Just remains for us to say thank you so much, Andy, and congratulations for driving this fantastic new addition to the Nexthink product family, and congratulations to everybody else who contributed as well. I'm sure there are many out there listening.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Andy.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how Nexthink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nexthink.com.